By the time you see this video, I will be on the ground in Geneva with hands-on with a ton of cool watches. When I get back, I'll have a ton more to say in detail about a whole lot of those watches. Right now though, the focus is on the status on Tudor. Where are they? Are they still the market and enthusiast darling, or has that picture changed a bit? Let's dive in. What's new? We have a new Black Bay 41mm in full monochrome with updated METAS movement, thinner case and Jubilee bracelet, just like the Burgundy released last year. We have a 39mm Black Bay 58 GMT Coke bezel with gilt accents. And then there's a Clair de Rose line, which is likely marketed towards those of the feminine persuasion. And we get a full gold green dial Black Bay 58. What did we get last year? Well, over the full year, we actually got a ton of watches. Unlike Tudor, Rolex does not limit the vast majority of their releases to Watches and Wonders. At Watches and Wonders last year, we got the Burgundy 41mm Black Bay with METAS, tons of updates on the Black Bay regular models, including a new Jubilee bracelet, and the star of the show was the Black Bay 54. Comparing Watches and Wonders 23 with Watches and Wonders 24, it's more or less the same. One really cool and wildly popular watch, the 54 last year and likely the GMT this year. Then an iterative upgrade, both the Black Bay 41 last year and the Black Bay 41 this year. And finally, a couple of smaller changes, seemingly similar. I think the Black Bay GMT is the official star of the show, and it seems I'm not the only one that thinks that. For the longest time, people have complained that regular Black Bay GMT was too large at 41mm. They fixed that and put it in the smaller 39mm form factor of the Black Bay 58. The Black Bay Pro has always been criticized for being a bit slab-sided at over 14mm. This new GMT is at a very manageable 12.8mm, which is less than a Seamaster 300M. Everybody and their sister wanted a Rolex GMT with a Coke bezel, but we got a Tudor GMT with a Coke bezel. Faux rivets aside, this is a watch that checks all the boxes of what people want. In my first reaction video, I said I was a little bit surprised about the gilt. Not that I didn't like it, but more that I thought the gilt and Photina trend was on the retreat. But it's still very nice, despite the slight inconsistency in the overall Tudor lineup, which I'll get back to. The Black Bay GMT fills a void in the Tudor lineup, but I do feel like Tudor are a little bit late to the game. Longines have had quite a while to carve out a space for themselves with their 39mm GMT option, the Spirit Zulu Time, which, excluding the 5 stars on the dial, I personally think looks a whole lot better. Also, Monta has the Sky Quest, which I've had hands-on recently, and I'll be doing a video about that. Stay tuned. It does a whole lot of the same. Both of those watches that I mentioned are significantly cheaper than the Tudor. At over $4,500, this thing is way more expensive than Longines, Monta, and a whole lot of others. And Tudor does make amazing watches, but dollar for dollar, I'm not convinced they are that much better from a pure build quality perspective. And yes, I know they don't have the same movement and it's not the same kind of GMT complication, but I still feel the price is a bit steep. And coupled with being a little bit late to the small GMT game, I do feel that Tudor are in some ways playing catch up. When you are done with this video all the way to the end, you need to go back and watch my video about Rolex that I did a couple of days prior to this one. One of my key points is how Rolex has a very clear approach to upgrades, how options and variety are something that you get in the precious metal space, and the steel space, so steel Daytona, steel sub, are relatively limited in options. The Daytona has 2 steel references and close to 12 or 13 or 14 full gold bracelet references. Rolex is all about getting you to buy those expensive references. Tudor doesn't do that. Variety is primarily at the entry level. You can get multiple variants of the Black Bay 58, multiple variants of the Black Bay 41. They do have some two-tone models and a silver model here and there, but it's not core to their lineup. And now they have a full gold with gold bracelet Black Bay 58. This is their only full gold model. It's interesting, and in the context of Tudor, it's a little bit quirky, but I don't really understand the logic. Tudor has, after all, since their relaunch in the US in this century, been all about not necessarily affordability, but being more rugged and more of an everyman watch. I know it's not everyman in the context of a Pagani or a San Martin or a Hamilton or the million other brands that sell watches well below $4,000. But Tudor has been the regular Joe's Rolex. For GPHG, last year they had the full gold big block chrono. So this isn't a first in terms of the way they are currently positioned. And in the large part, historically as well, full gold doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Google gold, vintage, and Tudor, and you will find watches. But I do make the case that it isn't particularly Tudor. I can't for the life of me come up with any other reason for this than that they just wanted to have something people would talk about, which is fine, but it's just unnecessary. I'd be really surprised if they were building the upgrade path that Rolex has. The Black Bay 41 in monochrome is right now my favorite Tudor prior to having hands-on. Sure, it's very plain. It's a lot like the Pelagos 39. It's a lot like the Tudor FXD in black and the Black Bay 54 to a large extent. But I love the size, and monochrome makes for an absolute strap monster. The FXD to a large extent can do the same, but it's limited because of those fixed lugs. But this 41 has the same versatility as an Omega Speedmaster, which is famously a strap monster also. But the Black Bay 41 does have me asking the question as to how the Tudor line doesn't feel quite coherent. In isolation, just purely the watches, you have a ton of watches that are very, very cool. But again, consider Rolex. What's the design language? It's modern, it's premium, it's conservative. And Tudor, you have watches like the Black Bay 58, the 41mm GMT models, and the new GMT that all still have a distinctly vintage vibe to them. The chronos as well to some extent, but then you have a Black Bay 41mm in burgundy, which lost a lot of that vintage vibe in the revision last year. Same with the monochrome 41mm. It's distinctively less vintage and more contemporary, more modern. I really thought the overall direction of Tudor was to step out of that vintage faux Tina gilt style of watches, and that's why the Black Bay GMT surprised me. The Black Bay GMT still seems to be prioritizing that vintage feel. There's nothing wrong with any of those watches. In isolation, I really like them both. They're just so different, and the overall coherence of the lineups doesn't quite feel like it's there. So what? If they sell, who cares? Well, I will kindly and politely point you to the catalog of Omega. That is a textbook example of being all over the place, stuffed with references. Omega has a lot of great watches, but it does sometimes feel like they are throwing things at the wall to see what will stick. And I have this teeny tiny feeling that Tudor sometimes do the same. Then there's the Clair de Rose. My channel is 96 or 97% male audience. It's not often I see a woman making herself known in the comments. So why cover the Clair de Rose, a watch that is so clearly for women? Well, because I think it's not the best release in the world. I asked my wife which Tudor she wanted. She pointed at a regular Black Bay with no dive bezel. She pointed at a Black Bay 54 and a Black Bay 58. At no time did she point to the Clair de Rose. When I asked her specifically about that model, she said, if that's my option, I'd rather have a Cartier. Now, since my wife is clearly the official spokesperson for every single woman everywhere on the planet, I think we can safely say that all women think exactly like my wife. This is what we call sarcasm and hyperbole. It's obviously not the case. But I think the point is there a market for Tudor watches with this type of design? I'm just not convinced. Let's just leave it at that. Here's the most important question. Is the Tudor hype over? Yes and no. I know I'm on the fence, maybe unsurprisingly, but I get the distinct feeling that people are not as hyped about Tudor as they were last year and the year before. I said last year in a video that Tudor were on their way into the boring phase. They had a solid lineup and were going to transition into a more Rolex-like mode with fewer groundbreaking new releases and more iterative releases. I also felt it was demonstrated a little bit clearly with the release of the FXD in black, where the reaction was, great watch, but the marketing was way too much for what was ostensibly a colorway update for the Marine Nationale. Tudor will likely release more stuff this year, but if I felt last year that they were going into this iterative release mode, I almost want to say I know it for sure by now. Small changes will be more the norm than big surprising releases. I also think the hype is down because the market overall is down. People still don't quite have the same amount of cash they had 5 years ago. The buying frenzy is over, and apart from Rolex, some Pateks and some APs, most watches are available below retail provided they're not newly released. People just aren't as excited about watches this year as they were last year. And a lot of people, according to Deloitte reports and watch charts and other sources, show people trending towards value. Tudor isn't quite the same value that it has been. But I also said no. And the reason being, I don't see who's taking their place. Longines is doing good things, but they haven't really taken over the airwaves. Zenith is doing really cool stuff, but I don't see the masses jumping on the Zenith bandwagon. The brand that I see closest to capturing the zeitgeist might be Omega, but I'm basing that almost entirely on a white Speedmaster, and one watch will not turn you into the hype brand. So who's going to replace Tudor on the front seat of the hype train? Cartier? Christopher Ward? Seiko? I don't see any brand beating the incumbent, that is Tudor. Overall, love the Black Bay GMT. Love the Black Bay 41 in monochrome. I can't complain on a watch level, but ignoring the watches in isolation, I feel Tudor isn't quite at the top of their game. But it doesn't matter. There are so many people that will want that Black Bay GMT, gilt and all. There are so many people that will want that 41mm monochrome Black Bay with a Jubilee bracelet in their collection. I would. Wouldn't you? Let me know in the comments what you think. Like, subscribe. Cheers.